I woke up on the cold floor, stuck to it as if my skin had fused with the concrete. The smell of old blood and rancid grease hit my nose before my eyes even opened, and I had to swallow hard to keep from throwing up. The air was dense, heavy, saturated with a humid heat that clung to my throat. I felt something pulsing inside my ribs. It wasn't my heart. It was deeper, as if my bones wanted to crawl out just to breathe. Every time I tried to move my arm, a dull crack ran from my shoulder to the base of my neck, and in the middle of that sickly silence, I heard the sound of a drop falling, not into water, but into blood. My hands were covered in a thick, viscous mixture. I ran my finger across my face and felt hard crusts peeling away from my skin, as if I had slept in the same spot for days. With every breath, that metallic stench invaded me, along with another smell, finer, sharper, hot rust mixed with burned motor oil. I opened my eyes, and the broken lamps hung from the ceiling like twisted necks, swaying slightly. The floor was stained a dark red, but it wasn't uniform. Fresher patches gleamed under the faint light slipping through the cracks in the metal door. I knew I wasn't alone in there. And it wasn't a rat or some swamp animal. It was something that breathed with a weight equal to mine. That's when I felt the first stab in my legs. Not like an ordinary cramp. It was as if a screw had been driven into the bone and was being tightened, turned, until it cracked. I heard the sound before I realized it was coming from me. A dry snap followed by a rough, dragging noise. I looked down and saw the skin on my knee stretch like wet leather, trembling until it tore and let a thick ribbon of blood run down my ankle. The hot air of the place seemed to go straight into the exposed flesh. Burning, I bit my tongue until I tasted iron to keep from screaming. Every second, my muscles contracted on their own, as if something inside had taken the reins. A metallic whine began to slice through the air, coming from the direction of the door. I didn't need to see to know. That unmistakable smell of silver burns you from the inside before it even touches the skin. It was as if every cell in my body had been programmed to fear it, to beg me to run. But my legs were already locked by the pain, and a heavy tingling was climbing my spine. The sound grew louder, now accompanied by dragging footsteps on the filthy concrete. With each approach, my body responded with more violent spasms, as if it wanted to tear itself apart to escape. My vision began to narrow, blurring the bloodstains on the floor. I felt the first crack in my jaw. It wasn't gradual. It was as if someone had shoved a crowbar between the bones and forced them open. My teeth struck the concrete, and one rolled until it stopped in a dark puddle beside me. The sound that came out of my mouth wasn't human, and it echoed through the slaughterhouse like an ancient warning from a throat that wasn't just mine. The instant the figure appeared in the doorway, holding something that gleamed in the half-light, the pain turned to hunger. And for some reason I didn't understand, my whole body wanted to run, not to attack, but to escape that gleam. The blade shone in the dim light, and the cutting scent of silver slid into my mouth as if it had a tongue of its own, scraping down my throat, flowing in icy threads to my stomach, where it turned into hot rust. Caleb, react, I told myself, but every muscle locked like wet steel cable. The man at the door was breathing heavily, and the sound of metal scraping the frame was a buzz that cut through my exposed teeth. I tried to get to my knees. The joint ground and gave way. The kneecap jumped a centimeter to the side and snapped back into place, leaving a white flash behind my eyes. The hanging lamp swayed with the wind, slipping in through the cracks, spreading a sweet smell of old meat mixed with cleaning product forgotten since 1987, when this slaughterhouse still had life. The puddle under my face reflected a jagged image. Torn gums, a late baby tooth spit from the flesh, as if my skull had regressed a decade in seconds, and eyes glowing animal when the light struck. The man took another step, and I heard the metallic ring. A chain, maybe, and something else that made my skin prickle like a dog in the first summer thunder. I knew that hunting routine. I had been on the other side of the site hundreds of times. But now I was the thing the hunter had in his hands. He spoke to me, and I hated the calm. "You already know what this does to people like you, don't you?" he said, and sweat ran down the back of my neck with the icy touch of a window left open in the dead of night. "People like you," he repeated, moving his arm slowly. I saw the dull gleam of bullets set into a bandolier and a short, hand-hammered blade, unpolished, silver from old cutlery, welded into an ugly, efficient dagger. My tongue clicked on its own, and I spat thick blood, tasting old battery and licked coin. Each of his steps crushed fragments of bone and rust, and the sound repeated in my ears with a delay, as if my hearing had doubled. The whole slaughterhouse seemed to tilt back, the walls breathing, the floor wanting to swallow my skin, the hooks in the ceiling ringing with a fine chime that scraped at the nerves. I thought about dragging myself away, but my arms trembled, not from fear alone. It was the fever of a body forcing the wrong fit, like a hand trying to slip into someone else's glove. The wind carried in the swamp from outside, stagnant water, sludge, wet carrion, and for an instant I wished to sink into the mud until the smell of silver was gone. The crack didn't come from me. It came from behind, from the narrow corridor that led to the pens. A creak from a door that should never have been opened again, followed by the dry shock of unlubricated metal. The hunter turned his head, and in the movement the blade's gleam struck directly into my iris, triggering a spasm that shot from my eyes to my jaw. I felt my jaw stretch another inch, the muscles in my neck winding into hard, thin cables, the saliva thickening, more viscous, almost milky. The corridor exhaled the scent of wet fur that wasn't mine, and the lamps traced pale circles on the floor like small, sick moons. The hunter raised the dagger and took 2 steps to the side, opening an angle, giving me a narrow window toward the exit. I tried to stand, but my ankle made an obscene click. The talus bone twisted half a centimeter and settled into a position that could only belong to another species. The pain came with a sound I both heard and felt, like ground glass poured into ear and flesh at the same time. A new scent cut through everything. Ozone, freshly filed metal, his silver boiling in the air even from a meter away. The corridor answered with another noise, something scraping on the cement, claws, nails, or both. I reacted the wrong way. Instead of attacking, I backed up, and my body punished me for the cowardice with a brutal tremor that began in my lower back and exploded in my sternum. I felt the cartilage burning like a cigarette put out on skin, burning from the inside out, and was overcome by a stupid urge to rip the skin from my chest with my nails, as if there were a zipper there. The hunter saw the fear and smiled with half his mouth, the kind of smile I'd seen before from behind the wheel, waiting for someone to stumble out of a roadside bar. He spun the blade. The silver sang, a thin note that made the hair on my forearms stand even where the skin was starting to thicken. I saw the old scars on my neck bubble, as if the silver were lighting embers stored there since the first night. The corridor erupted in screams that weren't human, and the hunter didn't look away. He seemed to know it was coming, and that's when I understood the real ambush. I was the bait, the lure for another like me, one who didn't yet know the taste of metal. The silver in his hand wasn't just for me, it was a beacon, and its gleam corroded my courage like caustic soda in the gut. What came out of the corridor didn't stop to measure ground. I only saw the blur, felt the displaced air, and smelled the hot bile that comes from a torn throat. The hunter spun with precision, timed by years of training, but the blade caught side flesh, not heart. A thread of white smoke rose from the open wound in the creature's shoulder, and its roar bent the air. My body answered with hunger, but the silver nailed me in place. The dagger only had to touch the railing for the scent to invade my skull from the base, as if it had slipped in through my vertebrae. I understood the ancient fear like a borrowed memory. Silver is forced silence, its muscle forgetting to obey, its bone forgetting its shape. The creature barreled into the hunter, metal scraping, sparks useless against the fat of the wall, and I took advantage of the chaos to drag my flesh forward, knees scraping over dried blood, nails digging into cracks in the concrete to get traction. Behind me was a corner where the shadow felt colder. I kept pulling my weight, feeling the calf tendon vibrate like an out-of-tune guitar string. Each millimeter, a coin tossed into the well of pain. If you can stand hearing steel sing inside your body without looking away, you've got the stomach for it. Write in the comments and stick around, because what comes next will make your ears grind inside like someone sharpening knives on your bones. The coldest corner of the slaughterhouse gave me no shelter, only silence to hear what was happening inside me. There was the sound of sandpaper running over cartilage behind my sternum, a friction that pulsed with my breathing and made my vision tremble like a lighthouse in foggy dawn. I opened my hand and saw the skin in the center of my palm rise in pale blisters, as if something were pushing from the inside out. When I closed my fist, the blisters burst with a wet pop and left a milky slick between my fingers. The corridor groaned with the weight of the two fighting, and the metal screamed high when the blade sank into flesh. The scent of hot silver reached me through the drainage grate, mixed with old rancidness and the sharp new sourness of adrenaline sweating out of skin. I tried to back farther into the shadow that smelled of nothing, but my right leg answered with a wholesale contraction, every muscle shortening at once, like a handful of cables pulled by invisible hands. I felt the femur push the edge of the hip from the inside and bit my lip open, my tongue seeking imaginary steel in the blood to see if it hurt less. The light flickered. A lamp spun on its broken wire and spilled a white flash across my shoulder. For an instant, the skin there seemed translucent, and I saw the shadow of the bone moving, not with my body's motion, but with the will of another anatomy. I thought, say her name, think of God, think of anything that will keep you here. But the only name that came was the name of the scent, silver, and that name alone made me shiver, as if someone had whispered it with ice inside my ear. The larger creature shoved the hunter against the table. I heard the edge bite into his back, with the hollow tone of old wood and spine hitting. The man growled with the professional calm of someone who had learned to hurt in silence and squeezed something that jingled. The reaction was immediate, like a chemical reagent dropped into solution. The air became light and cutting. A metallic whistle with no clear origin stuck its head into the room and yanked my nerves through the same hole. He was shaking the chain, I thought, and the chain had beads, and the beads weren't ordinary steel. The creature sensed it before I did. Its growl shifted in pitch, going from deep to a furious mewl, then to a shriek that scratched the walls, and I felt the sound slice through my windpipe from the inside, like fishing line. Even then, I saw my reflection in the darkened puddle gain a new frame. The bone of my brows cast a new shadow over my eyes. The cartilage in my nose split with the snap of a ripped seam, and my canines grew a full centimeter in a single breath, pushing the gum line back with the sound of wet paper tearing. I pushed my heels against the floor to tear my body from the corner, but my left heel gave and twisted, and in the turn, something came loose in silence, announcing the damage only when the weight returned. a cruel delay accompanied by a tiny crackling deep in the ankle. The smell of wet fur filled the room with force, but behind it came another scent, finer, that reminded me of a coin rubbed against a tooth, of an old spoon striking the bottom of a hot pan. It was the silver choking the beast's scream against the roof of its mouth. I wished I could be mute forever if it would silence the buzzing that silver lit beneath my skin. When the hunter slipped under the creature's arm and bolted down the corridor, it felt like someone had taken a weight off my stomach and dropped it onto my back. I inhaled sharply, and it burned, but the body overcame the hesitation and delivered a string of movements that weren't mine. I was on all fours without realizing it, and the palm of my left hand no longer had the same topography. The trigger callus that had been with me for years was fading under a new distribution of pressure, and the skin was opening in silent micro-fissures with each advance, as if small claws were searching for a way out between my fingers. I followed the scent of open air, and the open air stank of rot, but it carried wind. Each step was a negotiation between sharp pain and foolish relief, and the bones in my left foot screamed in a language I recognized as an ancient warning. Don't stand like a man if you want to run like an animal. I crossed the back door, and the swamp bit my ankle with the first warm mud of the night. The sludge rose and clung to the cut like a living poultice, drawing the blood out with the same malicious care as a spiteful bandage. Mosquitoes, mad for my salt, clung to the skin and hitched their hunger to mine. Behind me, the sound of the slaughterhouse went on. Metal against flesh, flesh against wall, wall against history. I dragged myself into the brush on my knees, every leaf carrying its own blade, every branch a finger pointing the way along my inner thigh. At the first fallen trunk, I had to climb over, and the body decided to grow taller at the worst possible moment. My spine cracked in 3 places, and the sound traveled through my ear canal with indecent clarity, as if I had a stethoscope shoved into my own marrow. Landing on my stomach on the other side knocked the air from me, churned my gut, and the vomit came up with strings of elastic saliva that stuck to the grass and pulled back in silver lines under the light of the sick moon. In the marsh, the night had its own dial, and the moon turned it minute by minute. The chorus of insects shifted twice as I reached a darker patch of still water, a mirrored blade that broke with each of my steps and gave back a face no longer fit for civil identity. I said my name under my breath, and it came out as if someone had switched on a light in the basement of my tongue. Caleb, 1 syllable too deep, the other too clipped, a sound that bit the roof of my mouth from within. Here the swamp has rules, I said, and the first is that whoever breathes too fast becomes bait for everything. I tried to slow my pace, but my body moved ahead. My sense of smell gained indecent saturation, and the world began to carry scents in layers. First the faint iron of my thinner blood, then the sweet rot of water with old leaves, then the muffled rancidness of animal fat settled at the bottom, and over all of it, like cheap church balm, the distant silver, that plague that bleeds without needing a cut. Someone was carrying it nearby, and I didn't need to see them. The fear that came with that scent wasn't human fear. It was a memory of the species, a recoil written into bone back when bone was still a drawing in clay. I crouched and touched the mud. My finger bones bit the ground at 4 points, and the feeling of support on 4 sides of the wrist brought an ugly kind of relief. The swamp stretched ahead in a false walkway of braided roots, and I moved along it as if crossing someone else's body, stepping on tendons, skirting pockets of fat, dodging failed organs. The squeal of a wild boar somewhere to the left made my neck turn before I decided to. My nape burned, and the skin there puckered as if someone had pulled a towel from the inside. I stopped only because my nose hit a void. No scent, a hole in the night. No insect flew there. The air had the temperature of metal. I stepped forward twice, and the void shattered all at once, as if I'd torn through an invisible curtain. The disciplined sound of living things came back in a gust, and between croaks, I heard what I didn't want to hear. The measured breathing of someone who knew how to wait, a human cadence, and beneath it an almost polite, discreet chime, the kind of metal that only sings to warn those who know its song. I froze, and my heart tried to climb up my throat. My throat answered with a low rumble like an old machine starting, and I felt the vibration in every hollow space in my skull. "Speak," said a voice older than my own face. "Apologize. Promise to vanish. Beg." I opened my mouth, and only vapor came out, and the vapor smelled of wet dog and burnt wire. The pain came back through my heel, as if I'd stepped on a nail made of light. The body chose without me and set me moving, pressed against the trunk, dragging my shoulder through moss. The first shot wasn't a shot. It was the snap of a branch, deliberate to make me look. And when I looked, I saw the greasy gleam at the water's edge, a circle of dull silver fixed to a line, a hook too big for fish, too small for cattle, perfect for flesh that learns to fear the shine from the cradle of fear itself. The line wasn't meant for me. It dipped and vanished, and I understood the message. The whole swamp was a net, and I was just the species stupid enough to believe in a cold shadow. When the moon slipped out from behind the cloud, the reflection in the muck showed two things at once: my face pushing out of its old frame, and the outline of a boot planted less than 10 steps away, its shaft stained with mud, and beside it, at the level of the hand, a contained gleam that made my tendons hum as if they were tied to a live socket. I said enough, and no one obeyed. My ribs opened another half-inch, and my skin gave with the sound of old cloth tearing on the bias. The boot didn't move, and that was worse than if it had come toward me. The contained gleam of the silver stayed still, like a lighthouse that knows the ship is already sinking on its own. Its scent invaded my nostrils and ran down my windpipe, leaving an acidic trail, burning all the way to the pit of my stomach. I felt my diaphragm lock, as if invisible fingers had pushed between my ribs and squeezed hard to keep the air from coming in. When I tried to back away, my spine wouldn't obey. There was a dry crack in my lower back, and a quick heat climbed upward, like boiling oil spilled down my spine. The nails on my right hand cracked under the skin, growing at wrong angles, forcing the flesh to split in fissures that released the smell of fresh, hot bone mixed with the rancid sweat already dripping from my forehead. The moon lit the swamp with that dirty light, and the reflection in the water showed me a face that was no longer entirely mine. The upper jaw jutting forward, teeth too long to fit in my mouth, and skin stretched as if the skull inside were pushing outward, ready to burst through. The breathing of the figure beside me had no hurry, and that made me weaker. The sound was controlled, measured, as if each inhalation were a calculated act, meant to spread the scent of silver through the air, reminding me that every molecule of that metal could be my sentence. I heard the muffled click of a holster being undone, and the almost imperceptible whisper of a weapon being drawn. I didn't need to see to know. The bullets were silver-loaded, each one ready to enter and cook me from the inside out. My heart slammed, each beat accompanied by a crack in my shoulders, as if the bones were trying to expand with every pulse. A second later, the tendons in the backs of my legs began to stretch, burning like strings being tightened to the point of snapping. The sound of water shifting behind me made me turn, and as my neck twisted, I felt muscles tear along the side, letting out a viscous heat that ran down to my collarbone. It smelled of living blood, but with a metallic undertone, as if the very air itself were starting to become silver. The movement in the water wasn't large, but enough to ripple a circle that caught the moonlight. A silhouette emerged slowly. First the head, then the broad shoulders, and finally the hands, or what looked like hands, clutching something bound by chains. Another hunter, but different. The chains he carried were black, but at the ends hung weights of polished silver, each shaped like a claw, swaying slowly as if they were scenting me. My body reacted before my mind. A raw surge rose from my gut and detonated in my chest, shoving my ribs outward with a sound halfway between splintering wood and tearing flesh. I dropped to my knees, and when I put my hands to the ground, I realized my fingers were already too curved to look human. The booted figure stepped forward, and the rasp of metal against a holster was like a fingernail on glass inside my head. The other hunter, the one with the chains, let out a low growl and began spinning the weights, their metallic hum slicing across the swamp and striking my teeth, vibrating down to the roots. There was nowhere to run. Ahead, the swamp was a maze of shallow water and roots, each step sinking to the knee in muck. Behind me, the slaughterhouse looked darker still, as if it were calling me back into a hole I'd never leave. The two moved in sync, and the air grew heavier, saturated with the cutting scent of silver. Each breath scorched my insides, as if I were inhaling vaporized molten metal. The veins in my arms began to pound, swelling under the skin, and a low, deep sound began to vibrate in my throat, unbidden. The transformation wasn't slow anymore. Now it was a sudden attack, a command from the body to survive or kill. The muscles in my back seized all at once, and I felt the skin stretch to the brink of tearing, as if something massive were trying to claw its way out. The booted hunter raised his gun, and the click of the hammer being drawn back rang through the marsh like an execution bell. Pain detonated. The vertebrae began to shift, one by one, each pop echoing inside my skull like point-blank gunshots. Heat surged down my arms, and the skin split into fine lines that quickly filled with dark blood. The air became too thick to breathe, and every time I drew in oxygen, it carried with it the bitter taste of old coin, scorching my tongue. The hunters came closer still, and now I could feel the silver's vibration through the ground, climbing through the muck into my legs. That's when I understood. The fear wasn't only in my head. It was physical, chemical, rooted deep in my body in a way I couldn't control. They knew this. They were playing it. I tried to step back, but my foot sank into the mud, and the swamp's cold shot straight into the wound at my ankle, wrenching a scream from me that wasn't human. The hunter pulled the trigger. If you've ever felt the air itself turn to poison in your body, you know the bullet doesn't have to enter before you start dying. Subscribe now, because what comes next will show exactly what it's like when silver pierces not just flesh, but everything you are inside. The shot came like a muffled thunderclap, but the impact wasn't just sound. It was smell. It was taste. It was a pain that had a color. The bullet didn't enter like lead. It burned before touching, and when it broke the skin, the silver reacted like acid, racing through my blood with impossible speed. I felt every vein ignite like a live wire, one by one, until my whole body was a blazing network. The flesh around the wound sizzled, releasing a vapor that reeked of melting fat and burning hair. The sound wasn't of an open wound. It was of flesh hardening, like leather left over flame. The heat tore up to my heart, then slammed back to my extremities, forcing my fingers to clench into the swamp floor. My newly formed claws sinking so deep I felt the earth give way, releasing a stench of rotting roots mixed with oxidized metal. The hunters didn't back off. The one with the boot moved in a slow circle, keeping his gun low, but his gaze fixed on my knees, as if he knew they'd be the first to give. The other kept the chains spinning, the vibration of the silver in them a piercing whine that climbed my spine and stole the air from my chest. I tried to step forward, but the bullet still burned, and every movement made the metal scrape inside me, releasing a sweet, almost nauseating smell I knew was flesh cooking from the inside out. The pain wasn't constant. It came in waves, each one stronger than the last, like my body was being forced to remember what that metal had done to my kind since the beginning. My teeth clenched until there was a dry crack, and one of the canines that had already grown too far snapped at the base, leaving a hole that spilled thick, hot blood with the taste of living rust. In the murky water beside me, the reflection showed the skin around the wound changing color, from red to gray, and then to an almost white tone, as the metal drained something that wasn't just blood. It was like the silver stole strength, tearing the hunger out of the flesh along with the heat. The nearby veins thinned, retreating under the skin as if they wanted to escape contact. I felt the muscles in my thigh go slack against my will, and the weight of my whole body gave way, dropping me sideways into the muck. The swamp wrapped around the wound with warm water, but it only carried the smell of silver deeper into me. The chain-wielding hunter took the chance to throw one of the weights. It landed in the dirt inches from my head, and the vapor that rose from it sent a shiver crawling the entire length of my spine, making each vertebra creak. My body reacted on instinct. My spine arched, and my shoulders spread wider, tearing my shirt with a dry rip and leaving skin exposed to the heavy, wet air. I knew I had to get out, but the distance to any safe shadow felt impossible. The booted one reloaded, each cartridge sliding into the cylinder like a hammer strike inside my inner ear. Metal scraped inside the weapon, and the scent of freshly bared silver burst into the air. The breathing of the two hunters was synchronized, like they were following some old ritual, waiting for the exact moment my flesh would no longer have the strength to resist. Sweat ran down my face, stinging as it passed over the cut in my jaw, the salt mixing with the blood and making the wound throb like it had its own pulse. The bullet in my hip beat in time with my heart, each pulse a warning that my body was losing. Somewhere inside, the instinct to fight was trying to spark, but every time it rose, the scent of silver filled my lungs again, smothering it, reminding me that pain was faster than rage. If you've ever felt something burn through you from the inside out until it tears away what you are, hit like now, because when I finally react, it'll be worse than anything you've ever seen about werewolves. The silver in my hip throbbed like an extra heart, beating to a rhythm that didn't match the rest of my body. Each pulse pushed pain up through my abdomen and across my chest, like an invisible hand was squeezing my organs from the inside. The air around me felt denser, saturated with the metallic scent that clung to my throat. When I tried to move my injured leg, I felt the metal scrape inside, grinding against bone with a muffled sound, and an acidic heat spread down to my knee. The body, maybe out of desperation, reacted the only way it knew when about to break. It tried to change. My ribs began to move independently, each one pushing the skin from the inside, seeking space, rearranging the ribcage into a shape that had never been human. I heard the crack of cartilage stretching, and my breathing turned into a low, deep rumble, like an animal trying to crawl out of my throat. The booted hunter didn't fire. He was watching, waiting for the transformation to pass the point of no return. The chain wielder spun faster now, and the silver's whine was so sharp it made my teeth ache. The sound cut through my skull and pooled behind my eyes, pressing until my vision blurred. I felt a thin line of hot blood run down my ear canal, and the metallic taste returned to my mouth, even though I hadn't bled there. The swamp, once full of noise, was silent now. only the sound of metal and my heavy breathing remained, broken by the cracking of my own body adjusting. My right shoulder dislocated on its own, twisting backward at an impossible angle. And when it snapped back into place, it wasn't the same. The joint was looser, more elastic, ready for movements no man should make. The bullet burned less now, but that wasn't relief. It was worse. It meant the silver was settling in, becoming part of the flesh. The heat turned to a dry cold, like ice burning skin on contact. That cold crept up my spine, and when it reached the base of my skull, I felt a contraction so strong my jaw slammed shut with a snap. My tongue, caught between my teeth, split, and the blood ran thick, mixed with dense saliva that clung to my teeth like glue. The smell of that blood was a trigger. My vision cleared, but with it came a sudden hunger, a physical need to tear and chew, to feel living flesh in my mouth. Instinct tried to take over, but each time it surged, the scent of silver pushed it back down again. A weight crushing every reaction. The two hunters shared a quick glance, like they'd silently agreed on the next move. The booted one lowered his gun for a moment, only to show me it wasn't the only threat. From his side holster, he drew a short dagger, its blade catching the moonlight in a way that was almost dirty. Not polished shine, but a pale halo that seemed to stick in the eye. Just looking at it made the wound in my hip react, throbbing faster, like metal recognizing metal. The chain wielder dropped one of his weights into the muck. The sound was muffled, but the reaction in my body was instant. My legs tried to pull me back, even against my will, and a shiver rolled across my skin, raising every hair as if each one meant to run away on its own. I was trapped on a threshold. One step forward and the beast would take over. One step back and the silver would finish the job. My body trembled with every breath, and the cold from the bullet inside me was already mixing with a heat that climbed from the base of my spine. Heat that promised more pain and more broken bones. I knew that once it started, there'd be no stopping it, and I couldn't even tell which side of the line I'd fall on. The heat at the base of my spine climbed like fire, licking waterlogged wood. Slow at first, then suddenly quick, snapping at each vertebra. My body was deciding on its own. The muscles in my back swelled, pushing the skin until it split into thin fissures, and from inside those openings oozed a thick, almost black liquid, with the smell of old iron left out in the rain. The booted hunter stepped closer, his dagger low, the tip catching the moon and spitting back a sickly glow. The silver bullet in my hip seemed to vibrate in response to the blade's presence, each pulse sending waves of pain radiating through my abdomen. My ribs began to separate, sounding like a dead tree splintering. Crack, 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 until it felt like my chest would open entirely. My breathing became a muffled roar, trapped between the instinct to attack and the physical memory of what silver could do to me. The chain-wielding hunter never took his eyes off me. He spun those silver spheres in a hypnotic rhythm, the sound so loud it felt like it was echoing inside my bones. I felt the metal as if it were scraping the insides of my shins, sending a painful shiver that climbed up to my hips. My vision split in two. On one side, the real world, wet and dark. On the other, hot pulses, heat mapping their bodies, red silhouettes against black. I knew exactly where to hit, where their hearts beat, where their breath quickened. But the smell of silver froze every muscle. My jaw cracked again and opened past the human limit. The skin at the corner of my mouth tore, hot blood running down my chin, mixed with thick saliva that dripped into the muck, spreading like dark ink in the still water. The booted one spoke softly, almost a whisper, but the words slid into my ears like a knife. "I'm not here to kill just you. There's another coming." My whole body reacted. My nails grew longer, my feet shifted, weight rolling forward onto the toes, ready for a leap. But the silver didn't allow it. It was like trying to run with chains around my lungs. No air, no blood response. The heat of transformation clashed with the metal's cold, meeting in the middle in a chemical war that left me dizzy. Muscles shaking, legs faltering. The chain's rhythm quickened, sharper, each rotation slicing away another piece of my strength. Then, behind me, the swamp moved. Water shifted, slow but heavy. Something big. The sound didn't match any common animal. Plants at the bank bowed, and a scent of wet fur and rotting meat spilled into the air. My eyes turned on their own toward the darkness, and there, between branches and shadow, 2 yellow points glowed. Not like mine, deeper, farther away, pulsing like a living beacon. The hunters saw them too. The booted one stepped back once, but kept his gun raised. The chain wielder dropped one weight and gripped the other tight, the metal dripping into the muck and steaming where it touched. The thing was coming, and every step it took pulled a low growl from deep in my throat, like my beast recognized its own. If you've ever felt the worst coming and still couldn't move, type a prata nomenti. Now, because what's about to step out of those shadows will show you why even monsters like me learn to back away. The water ahead split open as if something had ripped the swamp in half. It wasn't a splash, it was a brutal displacement, roots bursting, mud sucking air. The yellow points grew, and soon the whole silhouette emerged, broad, shoulders hunched, fur soaked in water and fresh blood, dripping in thick ropes that vanished into the muck. The smell hit first, not just the rancid stench of old meat, but something sharper, acidic, like blood stored in iron for days. My lungs filled with it, and they began working on their own, each breath shorter and faster. My body recognized the threat before my mind did. My skin bristled, and old scars burned, as if each one were reopening all at once. The booted hunter shifted his stance, dagger forward, while the chain wielder lowered his center of gravity, ready to spin and throw. They knew what was coming. So did I. The creature opened its mouth, and the sound that came out didn't belong to either animal or man. It was deep enough to make the ground vibrate, but laced with a high note, hidden, like a metal whistle heating over flame. That sound struck my teeth and made the silver in my flesh answer, pounding harder, spreading pain through me as if to remind me I didn't belong to it. Its eyes never blinked. The moonlight moved in and out of its pupils, like they were windows to somewhere deeper and colder. Even wet, its fur seemed to move on its own, bristling in waves that climbed from its spine to its neck. I felt my chest muscles contract, as if something were pulling me forward. Hunger rose with it, raw, but the silver's scent around me was a brake, an invisible shackle holding me in the mud. The swamp, which seconds ago had seemed endless, now felt like a small room. The creature stepped forward twice, each move sounding like old wood groaning under too much weight. Water streamed from its fur in curtains, hitting the muck with a sticky wet slap. It looked at me first, as if measuring me, then shifted its gaze to the hunters. The booted one raised his gun, but didn't fire. He knew the first wrong move could be the last. The chain wielder spun once more, and the silver's whine mingled with the deep sound of the monster's breathing. The effect was instant. The creature stepped back half a pace, but the retreat came with anger. Its claws dug into the mud, and the scent of earth and blood rose with it, leaving no doubt that if it wanted, it could reach us in seconds. That was when I realized my breathing no longer answered to me. Every time I tried to control it, my body sped it up, as if preparing for an inevitable strike. My nails had grown longer, tearing into the mud beneath me, and the muscles in my arms locked, ready to throw my weight forward. The silver in my hip burned hotter now, as if it were reacting to the presence of that thing. It wasn't just fear, it was recognition. Something in me knew it carried the same curse, but older, deeper, carved into its flesh. My bones began shifting on their own, rearranging into a more aggressive frame, each displacement echoing like green wood forced to bend. I didn't know if the next move would be mine, theirs, or hers. The air was saturated with blood, sweat, muck, and silver, every sense pulling in a different direction. The only silence was inside my head, that single second before a decision. The tension broke without warning. The booted hunter moved first, not toward the swamp-born beast, but toward me. The silver blade carved a quick arc, slicing the air with a high whistle that stabbed through my eardrums. Instinct shoved my body to leap back, but the wounded hip locked, and the pain was like a branding iron pressed into bone. The scent of my own blood, mingled with silver, spilled into the air and hit everyone around. The creature reacted as if it had heard a summons, lunging forward in an eruption of water and muck, its paws flinging clumps of root and rotting earth. The sound was heavy and wet, each step a blow that rattled up my spine. The chain wielder spun his largest weight and hurled it, the silver's slicing hum colliding with the beast's roar. The hit landed square on its shoulder, and vapor surged up instantly, dense, white, stinking of scorched fat. The creature howled but didn't back down. Instead, it pivoted and slammed its other paw like a living sledgehammer into the chainman's chest. The blow lifted him clear off the ground and hurled him into a fallen tree. The sound of the rib breaking wasn't muffled. It cracked through the swamp like a branch snapping. I felt that break inside myself, as if my own bone had given way. The booted hunter didn't look back. He crouched, dagger forward, moving toward me in measured steps. The metal caught stray flashes of moonlight, each glint pushing the silver in my wound to sing louder, until it was indistinguishable from my own ragged breathing. The creature saw him closing in and shifted her rage toward him, not out of mercy for me, but as if claiming me. A heartbeat later, she leapt. But the swamp punishes leaps. Her front paw plunged deep into the muck, and for a breath, she lost traction. The hunter seized the moment, lunging to drive the dagger home. It never landed. The sound was flesh striking flesh, but magnified, amplified by weight and raw force. The dagger tumbled into the muck, its silver glow snuffed under thick mud. That extinguishing was like a weight lifting off my chest. Air filled my lungs fully for the first time since I'd seen it, and my body answered with a spasm that rolled me aside, away from them both. But the silver was still inside me, locked in the burning bullet in my hip. I knew that as long as it stayed there, I had no strength to face either hunter or beast. Blood ran thick and hot, mixing with the mud that was already caking over the wound. I dragged myself to a half-submerged log, each movement tearing more pain out of me, and pressed my back to it. The creature and the booted hunter circled each other at close range, the swamp an arena made for this fight. The chainman coughed in the background, trying to rise, while the silver in his weapon swayed and gave off a low, threatening hum. The moon lit the scene in broken flashes, and each time its light touched the fallen dagger, my body shivered. I knew that if it was lifted again, my chances of leaving alive would dissolve instantly. If you've ever felt the only thing between you and death was the weight of an object on the ground, type Prata Affogata, because when that blade finds the right hand again, it'll cut deeper than skin. The dagger was less than 3 meters away, but every inch toward it felt like crossing hell. The log under my back groaned with my weight, and the muck around me clung to my legs like it meant to keep me here forever. The beast and the booted hunter stared each other down, their breaths visible in the cold air pooling over the swamp. The chain wielder, wounded but relentless, crawled back toward the larger silver weight lying halfway between him and the fight. Its faint metallic whisper still slipped into the air, and each vibration speared my wound like thin needles driving straight into bone. The beast moved first. It wasn't a direct strike. It slid sideways, claws scraping through the mud, releasing the smell of wet earth and burnt blood. The hunter reacted, stepping back and pivoting to keep his front always facing her. In that movement, my eyes caught something, a glimmer beneath the water, not far from the fallen blade. It was Silver's reflection, disguised under the slow ripples of the swamp. Heat rose through me at the thought of reaching it, not to use it, but to take it out of play. With each second, my flesh felt less pain and more fury. The transformation wanted to finish its work, and my consciousness was already starting to sink. I tried to crawl. My hip burned as it was forced, the silver bullet inside like a living thing, reacting to the strain, shifting slightly with each motion. That sent an electric spike of pain down my leg, but I kept moving. The ground was carpeted with rotting leaves, wet and gelatinous, and each time my hand sank into them, a sweet, rotten smell rose, like meat left in the sun. The beast roared loud, the sound rattling my spine. I couldn't tell if it was fear or recognition. My chest swelled on its own, skin stretching, muscles shifting into place for a leap. Then something hit the water beside me. A weight, small but dense. When I looked, I saw it was one of the hunter's silver rounds, lost in the chaos of the fight. The flash blinded me for a second, and in that second, the smell overwhelmed me. My nostrils burned, my throat closed, as if the air had turned solid. The transformation recoiled, my body shrinking by force, as if hooked from the inside and dragged back. I tried to push the round away, but the contact made my skin blister, a thin vapor hissing up along with a faint sizzle, like my flesh was frying. The sound of the chain filled the air again, and the wounded man managed to get upright enough to throw his weight. It hissed past my shoulder, cutting the air, and struck the beast in the flank. The blow made her howl, but she didn't retreat. She turned toward him instead, giving the booted hunter the opening to plunge his hand into the muck and grab the blade. When the silver's shine surfaced again, my vision tunneled. I knew that with the next strike, the metal would choose a body to silence. And by the way he looked at me, I knew exactly whose. He raised the blade, and the moon dressed it in a light that wasn't just reflection. It seemed alive, as if the metal was breathing. The scent of silver sliced through the air, burning straight into my lungs. My legs buckled, dropping me into the cold muck. The beast, ignoring the chain still smoking in her flank, turned her head toward me, and the growl that came out sounded like stone splitting. The dagger shook in the hunter's hand, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision. One fast stroke, and the problem would end here, forever. My body reacted on instinct. My spine arched, each vertebra popping like it was being broken and set into a new joint. Heat surged through my limbs, my skin splitting in fine cracks that bled a dark liquid smelling of metal and old sweat. The bullet in my hip screamed with my flesh, the sound echoing in my skull. The chain man, blood running from his mouth, shouted something I didn't catch. But the booted hunter never took his eyes off me. I was the target. I had always been the target. The beast must have realized it, because she moved without warning. One bound, and she was between us, her massive body throwing water and muck in all directions. The impact against the hunter was a dull, crushing thud, flesh into flesh, bone snapping under weight. The dagger flew, spinning in the air before splashing down near me. Its gleam burned my eyes, but not as much as it burned the open cut in my leg when I touched it. The pain shot straight up the nerve into my chest, but with it came a rush of pure, almost sweet rage, shoving hesitation aside. The silver was in my hand, even burning, even cutting. I gripped it. The metal vibrated like it wanted to escape, but I clenched until I felt blood running between my fingers. The beast and the hunter rolled in the muck, each blow sending up clouds of hot vapor. The chain wielder limped closer, bones grinding with each step, his weapon swaying and humming. I knew I had one chance to decide the ending. The silver could kill her, or him, or me. I looked at the blade, at the beast, at the hunter. The air was so thick with blood, sweat, and silver, it was hard to breathe. The moon hung high, and for a moment everything froze, as if the entire swamp was holding its breath. Then, without thinking, I moved. If you've ever felt the only way out was choosing which death to accept, subscribe now, because what I did with that blade isn't just going to change this night. It's going to change everything you think you know about monsters.